What's the biggest difference between Bill Guerin and Bill Zito? It could be the willingness to put all the chips in the middle of the table to make their team as good as possible. We'll discuss 3 key elements to win a Stanley Cup trophy today on Locked On Wild.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will take a look at 3 key facets that led to either the Florida Panthers winning the Stanley Cup trophy or the Edmonton Oilers losing for the second straight year. And we'll take you all the way back to the trade that started it all for the Florida Panthers. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, host of Seth on Sports, and credentialed media member. And the Stanley Cup final is over for the second straight season. The Florida Panthers victorious as they beat the Edmonton Oilers 4-2 in the series. They win the pivotal Game 6 by a score of 5-1. That doesn't do the score justice, because save one Edmonton goal, it was just more of the same that we've seen in this series. There were a couple of games that were rather close, but it just seemed as the series unfolded that Florida exerted their will and sent Edmonton home empty-handed for a second straight season and took one fewer game to do it. There are a lot of elements that are required to make it to the Stanley Cup final and to win the Stanley Cup final, health being one of them. Scoring, defense, goaltending, special teams. You need all of those elements to be able to get things done and win the trophy. But I want to take you back to the trade that started this all. If you'll recall, the 2021-2022 season featured a Florida Panthers team that went 58-18-6. They had 122 points. Joel Quenneville was the coach at the time. He, however, was dismissed because of the findings of the investigation into the Kyle Beach situation in Chicago. Andrew Burnett came in to mind the ship in Quenneville's stead. It was the President's Trophy winner. They were 6 points clear of anybody else in the East, 3 points clear of the Colorado Avalanche for the overall points lead in the NHL. And in the first series of said playoffs, things went about as you would expect, as they were able to get past the Washington Capitals. Now, it took 6 games, and there were some underlying numbers in those games that were a little concerning, but we'll talk about those here in a second. You get to the second round, and the Panthers are swept by the Tampa Bay Lightning. 4-1, 2-1, 5-1, 2-0 are the scores in those games. So you score 3 total goals in 4 games. The power play was abysmally bad in the entirety of the postseason. And all of a sudden, a Panthers team that was the darlings of the NHL, President's Trophy winners, fantastic season. Oh, this is going to be the team that gets to the Stanley Cup. Although, to be fair, anybody that follows the NHL knows that the President's Trophy is very cursed. But you go from having the most points in the NHL to winning one round, and that's it. And Bill Zito had a decision on his hands. He had a very good team. A lot of the elements for this Florida Panthers team were already entrenched by the time this roster had a lot of its pieces that would go on to win 2 Stanley Cups in a row. You had the likes of Alexander Barkov. You had Sam Reinhart. You had Sam Bennett. You had Carter Verhaeghe. You had many of the pieces that were on the roster. Gustav Forsling. You had a lot of the pieces that are still here. And the team, in Bill Zito's eyes, it was a great team, but it wasn't a legitimate threat. There were a couple of elements that were needed in Bill Zito's eyes to be able to turn this into a real, legitimate contender for the Stanley Cup. And so, after that loss in the second round to the Tampa Bay Lightning, Bill Zito pushed all of his chips into the middle of the table. He went out and acquired Matthew Tkachuk from the Calgary Flames in exchange for Jonathan Huberdeau, who I will remind you had a 30-goal, 115-point season with the Panthers, fresh off of a 30-goal, 115-point season. And Bill Zito makes him the centerpiece of that trade. They also traded Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt, and a conditional 2025 first-round pick. They get a 2025 fourth-round pick in return for Matthew Tkachuk. Now, I remember at the time thinking, interesting trade for the Panthers to make, because Jonathan Huberdeau is quite the player. Boy, was that a bit of an oversight, to say the least. But what Bill Zito did was he took his team that was a great regular season team, but it was a team that lacked bite, and it was a team that lacked an identity. And you could put a few players in front of Matthew Tkachuk as far as their importance to this team. Alexander Barkov is obviously of incredible importance to this Florida Panthers team. But make no mistake, Matthew Tkachuk was the heartbeat that this team was missing. He was the identity that this team lacked. And by Bill Zito not being comfortable with where his roster was at and deciding if we are really going to get to where we need to get to, we got to think big. We got to think above where we have been. And so he makes that trade, and the Florida Panthers have gotten to the Stanley Cup final each of the last 3 seasons. Now, another big element of this that has gone in the favor of the Panthers was the selection of their newest head coach. After you had the Joel Quenneville situation, you obviously had Andrew Brunette fill in the interim. It just didn't work out. And so enter Paul Maurice, who comes in after his stint with Winnipeg, lengthy stint with Winnipeg. And his Jets teams, you know, they were good, but not spectacular. He had a couple of really good seasons with the Winnipeg Jets, but they weren't spectacular seasons in Winnipeg. He comes to Florida, and he has not only a season in which the Panthers go from the last team in to getting all the way to the Stanley Cup final, to then going back, winning the whole thing, and then doing it for a second consecutive season. in terms of winning the cup. They found the right coach, is what I'm trying to say. They found the guy that knew how to push the buttons and how to get all of the parts of this roster to gel. He knew how to turn Alexander Barkov from a pretty dynamic scorer to arguably the most feared defensive center in the league. He knew how to turn Sam Reinhart from a good goal scorer to an excellent goal scorer. He just knew how to get more out of these parts and how to put them together in a way that turned them into the dynasty that they have become. And I think this is probably the most common thing that I see from Wild fans, and I mean, it's pretty easy to point to, is it doesn't seem like the Wild have the right guy as head coach, number one. And number two, where Bill Zito didn't get comfortable, he flipped and went aggressive. The Minnesota Wild seemingly have done the opposite. Now, there have been constraints that have prevented the Wild from making a bunch of moves in the offseason. But this is, I think, the big lesson to take away from this Cup run and this multi-year run that the Florida Panthers have been on, is that you have to be willing to risk it all to get to where you want to get to. And Bill Zito did that. And that's why his team, that's why he is widely regarded as one of the best GMs in the league. That's why his team has gone to the Cup final 3 straight years and has now won 2 of them. He hit on the head coach, and he made the big swing that got his team over the top. Now, there are other elements that go with this that I do think the Wilds, they have some of the components that you need, particularly, I think, between the pipes. So we'll take a look at how big of a role goaltending played in the Stanley Cup final, and if the Minnesota Wild have the guy they need in the net when we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. We are nearing the end of the NBA playoffs, and every game has delivered highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. My favorite part about FanDuel is, especially for the Major League Baseball season that's unfolding in front of us, is the ability to pick a player, let's say Byron Buxton. And if you have a feeling that he is going to have a good day at the plate, maybe he's going to hit a home run, you can make that call during the game. You can bet him to hit an anytime home run, anytime during the game. And FanDuel will keep you in tune and let you know if your bet has indeed won. It's just one of many options that FanDuel brings to the table. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. So we talk about the big swing that the Florida Panthers made to set this run up. There have been little moves that have been made in addition, which we'll talk about in the third segment here today. But I think the most common thing that I noticed throughout the course of these Stanley Cup playoffs is how important good goaltending is. Stuart Skinner just by and large was not it. I know he had the rebound run during the postseason where he played himself back into the starter's role. But if you look at the goals saved above expected leaders for the postseason, Stuart Skinner was dead even. He did not save any goals above expected. He did not give up any goals below expected. He was just average. And that's not going to get it done. That's not going to cut it. And then you have Calvin Pickard, who was 2 goals saved below expected. You can't afford to have shaky anything, let alone in the net. Think about just how much energy the Oilers had to devote to their starting goaltender decisions throughout the course of this series. After Stuart Skinner got pulled, there was this cloud hanging over the team. Who's going to start in net? Is it going to be Pickard again? Is it going to be Skinner again? Stuart Skinner is a good goalie, but there's a difference between a good regular season goalie and a good postseason goalie. You have to have a good postseason goalie. Sergei Bobrovsky is all of that. Sergei Bobrovsky played fantastic throughout the entire postseason. He saved 12 goals above expected in 23 games. So he's taking a half a goal off the board every game. And in the Stanley Cup playoffs, when the games get tense, the games get tight, that matters. You have to have a goalie that can make the routine saves, and you have to have a goalie that can make the flashy saves every now and again. And somebody that you just don't have to worry about. Somebody you feel confident in back there in order to somebody you feel confident will do their job, that you don't have to devote extra attention to help, and you don't have to make goaltending decisions during the series. So that was one of the things. And let's just look at the previous winners of the Stanley Cup over these last few years and the goalies that they have deployed. Paul Maurice. The last 2 years, Sergei Bobrovsky, who has been as steady as they go. The Edmonton Oilers have been playing this song and dance with Stuart Skinner over these last 2 years. It has had some moments, but by and large, not good. The Vegas Golden Knights, and even for the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup final, they lost. They still had Sergei Bobrovsky in. Adin Hill had a fantastic season and a fantastic run down the stretch in the postseason to get to that Stanley Cup final and win that Stanley Cup for the Golden Knights. Colorado Avalanche over the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is maybe the one exception that we've seen in the last several seasons. Darcy Kuemper was largely an average goalie during that season for the Colorado Avalanche, but they had a season much like the Minnesota Wild did in 2021, 2022. They had an offense that could outscore all of their problems. So that's maybe the one exception. But even the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2020, 2021, and 2022, who was in net for them? Andrei Vasilevsky, elite goaltender. St. Louis Blues, the year that they won the Cup over the Boston Bruins. They won because Jordan Binnington, amongst other things, locked down the goaltending position and basically just took the net over. So they got good goaltending down the stretch. Any of those years, with the exception of the Colorado Avalanche, then it's not like Darcy Kuemper was hideous. Like, he had moments. The numbers by and large, he was mostly just a league average goalie. It's so hard to get all the way through with average to below average goaltending. And if you look at what Filip Gustavsson has done over the last few postseasons, in 6 games, he was 2.3 goals saved above expected. this postseason. A 2.71 goals against average. He had a save percentage of .914, which was above what was expected analytically for him. And if you go even to 2022, 2023, Filip Gustavsson again, 2.4 goals saved above expected in 5 games. 2.81 goals against average. 2.33, I beg your pardon, goals against average, a .921 save percentage. So the Wild have had good to great goaltending in this series. And think about the games. Let's go back to the Dallas game, number 1. The game 1 double overtime win when Gustavsson had 51 saves on 53 shots. An average goalie doesn't do that for you. A below average goalie does not do that for you. You need a goalie that can steal you some games when your offense gets locked up, when you just can't find the back of the net. You need a goaltender that can keep the other team at bay. And I think Filip Gustavsson is that guy. I think Filip Gustavsson has shown he is very capable of being that guy for the Minnesota Wild. So, of all the elements that you need to win a cup, I think the Wild have now. Filip Gustavsson will continue to develop as he gets older. Let's keep in mind he's still just a couple of years into his NHL career. So as he gets more seasoning and experience, you would expect that his postseason numbers are going to get better, even than they already are. You've got Jesper Wallstedt waiting in the wings for a chance at that himself. So of the things that you need to have, goaltending is one that I don't worry about as much. There are plenty of areas that are concerns if this Minnesota Wild team is going to turn themselves into a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. Goaltending is pretty low on the list for me. Now, that being said, there are a few other things that Bill Guerin especially should be taking note of after watching the Florida Panthers win the Stanley Cup final. We'll talk about those roster decisions as well as acquisitions and just overall depth. We'll talk about all that to finish up today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure to hit that like button on YouTube and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Just a few things that stood out from the Stanley Cup final, from the Panthers win over the Oilers. Goaltending is probably the biggest thing that stood out to me, but just the overall lineup construction for the Florida Panthers. I mean, we've talked about it at length on this show. Everydayers know how much we have pointed to the center position. And the fact that the Panthers can roll Alexander Barkov, Sam Bennett, Anton Lundell as their top 3 centers is pretty impressive. They not only are they adept at scoring the puck, they're just uncomfortable matchups to play against. And not only that, you've got Carter Verhaeghe and Sam Reinhart. This is according to Daily Faceoff, the last lineup that they rostered against the Oilers. You got Carter Verhaeghe and Sam Reinhart on the top line. That's a legit, bona fide, no doubt about it, top line for the Panthers. Line 2, Evan Rodriguez, Sam Bennett, and Matthew Tkachuk. Again, the only player there that is really even a question in that top 6 is Evan Rodriguez. But Evan Rodriguez was brought in as initially just a kind of stopgap measure for this Panthers team. He was brought in to just add a little element to their roster from a scoring perspective, and he absolutely blew up. He did fantastic in the initial year. Now he has since signed an extension to stick around, but he's a guy that can still get you, 15 to 20 goals a season on your second line, and he does produce. So you couple that in with Bennett and Tkachuk, your third line of Anton Lindell, Eetu Luostarinen, and deadline acquisition Brad Marchand. That's hard to top. Lundell is, was a guy that was there. He was a few picks after Marco Rossi was selected in that same draft. He has turned into an absolute beast. Brad Marchand obviously brought in for a deadline role. He slots into the third line, and he's one of their leading scorers for the entire postseason. That team is 3 deep. Bona fide 3 deep. And the fourth line even is no slouch themselves with AJ Greer, Tomas Nozick, and Jonah Gadjevich. They've got some beef on that fourth line. If you want to have a fourth line that's got a little more beef to it, do that on the fourth line. This Panthers team's got 3 lines that can score, and 3 lines that did score through the course of the postseason. The Oilers, on the other hand, you look at the lineup that they rostered. You had Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Connor McDavid, Corey Perry. Again, Nugent-Hopkins is one of their best players. Connor McDavid, the best player on the planet. Corey Perry had a good postseason. But then your second line, Evander Kane, Leon Draisaitl, Kasperi Kapanen. And Draisaitl was really the only one that produced on that line. Jeff Skinner, Adam Henrique, and Trent Frederick. Yikes. So no wonder the Panthers won that third line matchup when those two were matched up together. That's not great. And then Vasily Podkolzin, Matthias Janmark, and Connor Brown is your fourth line. Yeah, Florida won that bottom 6 matchup pretty handily. And that's what that is how you win these games in these series. Your top couple of lines butt heads against each other, cancel each other out. Whichever team has the better quality of depth is the one that comes away with the win. And that was Florida. I mean, just look at the number of players that scored goals in this postseason for the Panthers. They were led obviously by Sam Bennett, who had 15, which is just an insane number in 23 games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 different players scored in the 23 postseason games that they played. 19 different players scoring goals in the postseason. And you have players that are making a contribution on almost a nightly basis as well. Here are the players that were at or around a point per game in the postseason for the Panthers. Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Reinhart, Matthew Tkachuk, Alexander Barkov, Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, Eetu Luostarinen, Anton Lindell, and Evan Rodriguez had 15 points in 21 games. Aaron Ekblad and Nate Schmidt had double digits as well. That lineup depth should be the envy of the league. And getting players that just are going to step in and step up and down the lineup. That's why the Panthers won. So if you are Bill Guerin, here are a couple of things that I take away from what we saw from the Panthers. A, you can't get comfortable with the roster you have. If there's a way to take it to the next level, you have to put your chips in the middle of the table. Bill Zito did it. His team has gone to the Stanley Cup final every year since. A player that can be the centerpiece of the identity that you want your franchise to have on the ice. And as good as guys like Alexander Barkov, like Sam Reinhart, like Sam Bennett, as good as those players are, they do not bring to the table what Matthew Tkachuk does for this team. He is the face, the focal point, the heartbeat, the pulse of this roster. And as he goes, this team goes. The Wild have Kirill Kaprizov as their heartbeat. And they almost have the opposite problem, where you have the pulse as he goes, the roster goes player. You just need to build up the rest of the roster. And that's going to be the most eye-opening thing of how this offseason, next season, and the following offseason go, is are you able to do that through players that you have in the prospect pool, or do you need to go push your chips into the middle of the table? The Florida Panthers as well. Let's look at how their books have been appropriated. Let's look at how their money has been spent. They are doing all of this with a goalie making $10 million a year in Sergei Bobrovsky, and really zero plan after that. But here are the players that they have that are making $5 million or more on the roster. On defense, they have Gustav Forsling and Seth Jones. Now, this is cap hits. The Blackhawks are retaining roughly 26% of the Jones salary. So he's more like a $5 million per year player for the Panthers. But anyway, Forsling and Jones, so that's two. Anton Lindell, Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Reinhart, Matthew Tkachuk, Alexander Barkov. So they have high-ticket players on that roster. The key is what you do with the rest. Evan Rodriguez has been a great player for them. He's making $3 million. Eetu Luosterainen, he's making $3 million. They went out and got Nico Sturm, who has been a depth piece for them on a cheap deal. Brad Marchand was brought in with the help of the Boston Bruins to add to that lineup. Tomas Nozick was a depth piece for them. AJ Greer, Jonah Gadjevich, Jesper Boqvist. These all are pieces. And on the defense, too. Think about Dmitry Kulikov, a guy that was on the Minnesota Wild roster. We ran him out of town after the highlights against the St. Louis Blues, where he got olayed in front of the net multiple times. He goes to Florida. He's now a multi-time Stanley Cup winner as a third-pairing defenseman for them. You got Nico Mikkola. You've got Juvis Bolinskis. Nate Schmidt brought in as a bottom part of the D depth piece. Aaron Ekblad was another piece on that roster for them. All these guys that they bring in are willing to come in at a reduced rate because of what this Panthers team has built and what they have won. And that's how you got to do it. You have to find quality depth to fill out the entirety of your roster while also having the guys at the top. If you have money that is not getting you proper value in return, you're not going to do it. So for the Minnesota Wild, it's going to take the full component of the roster and finding suitable scoring depth. It's not even having good players that are good on defense. That's certainly part of it. But you have to find a way to field three lines that can score at will. That's how the good teams do it in the NHL these days. That's the big takeaway from here. I think the Wild have the goaltending that they need, but they do not have the lineup. So that's the challenge. That's what needs to be accomplished either this offseason, during the season, or next offseason. That has to be the goal because that's what you need to get yourself to the next level. And that's our episode for today. Appreciate everybody tuning in as you do each and every day of the week. Drop us a like and make sure to subscribe if you have not already so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.